The security scanner beeped 3 times. Staff Sergeant David Mitchell ran it over the black estate car again. Slower this time. Same result. Dense metal signature in the trunk. Unusual weight distribution. The kind of reading that meant something heavy. Something alive. Queen Camilla stood 15 feet away, her smile tight, her eyes watching his every movement. She'd been watching him for the past 5 minutes. Not casual observation, tracking. Mitchell had been a Royal Guard for 8 years. Before that, 3 tours in Afghanistan with the Parachute Regiment. 26 years old when he first deployed. Now 34, with enough experience to know when something was wrong. And right now, every instinct he'd honed in Helmand Province was screaming at him. The car shouldn't have been there. Not at Windsor Castle. Not at 4:30 on a Tuesday afternoon. Not without proper clearance. And definitely not with Queen Camilla standing beside it, personally supervising its departure. But before we get into what happened when Mitchell forced that trunk open, make sure you're subscribed to Crown Watch. Hit that like button and let us know in the comments where you're watching from, because what this guard found inside changed everything. Now, back to the story. Mitchell stood in the west courtyard of Windsor Castle. Grey clouds hung low over the stone walls. No ceremonies scheduled, no press. Just the quiet end of an autumn afternoon, the kind where you could hear your own footsteps on the cobblestones. He'd been on duty since 6 that morning. Standard 12-hour shift. The first 8 hours had been completely routine. Guard change at noon. Patrol checks every 20 minutes. Nothing unusual, nothing out of place. Then, at 4:15, the black estate car had pulled into the service courtyard. Not the main entrance. The service area, the place where deliveries came through, where staff vehicles were checked and logged. Mitchell had watched it arrive from his position near the West Arch. He hadn't thought much of it at first. Cars came and went, part of palace operations. But then Queen Camilla had appeared. Not from inside the palace, from the car itself. She'd been inside already, waiting. That was the first thing that felt wrong. In the 8 years of service, Mitchell had never seen Camilla use the service entrance. Never seen her arrive in an unmarked vehicle. Never seen her without at least one aide or security officer. Today, she was alone. Just her and the driver. And she was personally overseeing the loading of luggage into the trunk. Mitchell's training kicked in. Not dramatic, not obvious. Just a subtle shift in attention. He watched without appearing to watch. Standard surveillance technique. 3 large suitcases. Designer luggage. Louis Vuitton, he thought. Each one heavy enough that the driver struggled slightly while lifting them. Camilla directing the placement. Very specific about how they needed to be arranged. Then a 4th piece, smaller, a travel trunk. Old-fashioned style, leather straps, metal reinforcements, the kind used for transporting valuables. That trunk went in last. Camilla watched it with particular attention, made sure it was positioned in the center of the boot, made sure nothing else touched it. Mitchell had seen behavior like this before. Different context, different country, but the same pattern. People being very, very careful with something that mattered, something they didn't want damaged, something they couldn't afford to lose. He glanced at his watch. 4:23, guard rotation in 7 minutes. If he wanted to check the vehicle, he needed to do it now. Once the next shift arrived, once the car left the courtyard, the opportunity would be gone. Mitchell's mind went back to Helmand. June 2017. Mid-afternoon. Temperature pushing 42 degrees Celsius. The kind of heat that made your uniform stick to your skin and turned metal surfaces into brands. A vehicle had approached their checkpoint. White Toyota pickup. Common enough in the region. Civilian plates. 2 occupants visible through the windscreen. Mitchell had been on checkpoint duty for 6 hours that day. Had processed maybe 30 vehicles. All routine, all normal, But this one felt different. The driver was sweating, not unusual in that heat, but sweating more than seemed right. Hands too tight on the wheel, eyes darting between the guards. The passenger, though? The passenger was calm, too calm, sitting relaxed in his seat like he was on a Sunday drive, like there weren't armed soldiers pointing rifles at his vehicle. Mitchell had learned something in his first deployment. People reacted to stress in predictable ways. Fear showed in body language. Nervousness showed in behavior. When someone wasn't showing those signs in a situation that should produce them, it meant they were either incredibly brave or incredibly dangerous. And in Afghanistan, it was usually the latter. His sergeant at the time, a man named Williams, who'd been in the army for 16 years, had noticed Mitchell's attention on the vehicle, had seen him watching the occupants with particular focus. Williams had walked over, stood next to Mitchell, watched the same vehicle. "What are you seeing?" Williams had asked quietly. "Driver's nervous," Mitchell had said. "Passenger isn't. And the rear suspension looks wrong, like there's weight back there that shouldn't be." Williams had studied the vehicle for another 10 seconds, then nodded once. "Your eyes see things before your brain processes them," Williams had said. "Don't ignore that feeling. Trust what you observe." They'd stopped the vehicle, conducted a full inspection. The driver had protested, had claimed urgent business, had tried everything to convince them to let him through. The passenger had remained silent, that calm, relaxed posture never changing, even when they'd ordered him out of the truck, even when they'd started searching. They'd found the explosives hidden under a false floor in the cargo bed, 40 kilograms, military grade. Wired to a detonator the driver could trigger from the cab. The driver had been planning to get through the checkpoint, drive close to the base perimeter, and detonate. Take out as many soldiers as possible. Probably kill himself and the passenger in the process. The passenger had known, had accepted it. That's why he'd been so calm. He'd already made peace with dying. Williams had pulled Mitchell aside after they'd cleared the scene, after EOD had removed the explosives, after the two occupants had been taken into custody. "Good instincts," Williams had said. "You saw something everyone else missed. That's the difference between going home and going home in a box. Keep listening to your instincts." Mitchell had carried that lesson through 2 more deployments, through dozens of checkpoints, through every situation where his gut told him something was wrong. He'd learned to trust that feeling, the feeling that said, "Look closer, check again." Don't assume everything is what it appears to be. That feeling had kept him alive, had kept his unit alive, had prevented attacks and saved lives in ways that never made official reports. And right now, standing in Windsor Castle courtyard, watching Queen Camilla personally oversee the loading of an unauthorized vehicle, that same feeling was screaming at him. "Something is wrong. Check the vehicle. Don't let it leave until you know what's inside." He stepped forward. Casual movement, nothing aggressive, just a guard doing his job. Camilla's head turned immediately. She tracked his approach with that fixed smile. The smile people wore when they wanted to appear unconcerned but weren't. Mitchell had seen that smile before too. Different faces, same meaning. "I'm watching you. Don't come closer. Don't ask questions." He kept walking. "Ma'am," he said, stopping 6 feet from the car. Professional distance, respectful but firm. "I need to verify the vehicle clearance before departure." Camilla's smile didn't waver. "That won't be necessary, Sergeant. This is a private family matter." Private family matter. The phrase hung in the air between them. Mitchell had heard similar phrases before, usually from people who didn't want official scrutiny, who needed things handled quietly, who couldn't afford documentation. "I understand, ma'am," Mitchell said, "but all vehicles leaving Windsor require security clearance. No exceptions." He kept his voice neutral. No challenge, no accusation, just stating protocol. Camilla's eyes narrowed slightly. Not much, just enough for Mitchell to notice. I'm quite aware of the protocols, Sergeant, and I'm telling you, this vehicle has my personal authorization. Personal authorization. Another interesting phrase. Mitchell knew the actual protocols. Royal family members could authorize their own vehicles for personal use. But those authorizations still required logging, still required documentation, still required security verification. This car hadn't been logged. Mitchell had checked at the departure sheet 15 minutes ago. No vehicles authorized for Queen Camilla today. No private travel. No official engagements. Nothing. Ma'am, he said carefully, I don't see this vehicle on today's departure authorization. I'll need to verify with the guard commander before I can. You'll do no such thing. Camilla's voice had changed, sharper now, less smile, more command. This is a private matter, Sergeant. It doesn't concern you. Mitchell held her gaze. He'd been in situations like this before. Different context, but same dynamic. Someone with authority trying to prevent inspection. Using rank, using position, using fear. It never worked well. Ma'am, Mitchell said quietly, I have a duty to inspect all departing vehicles. I'm going to need to check the trunk. For 3 seconds, nobody moved. Camilla stared at him. The driver, still standing near the car, looked between them nervously. Then Camilla stepped forward, closer than necessary, close enough that Mitchell could smell her perfume. Something floral, expensive. Sergeant, she said, her voice low and precise, I am the Queen Consort. I am telling you that this vehicle does not require inspection. If you persist with this course of action, I will have you removed from palace service. Do you understand? Mitchell had been threatened before. Taliban fighters had pointed rifles at his face. IEDs had detonated within 50 meters. He'd been shot at, mortared, and once had a knife held to his throat during a close-quarters raid. Threats didn't work on him. Ma'am, he said, his voice unchanged, I'm going to inspect the vehicle now. He stepped around her. Not aggressive, not as disrespectful, just moving forward with his duty. That's when he heard it. A sound. Faint, coming from the trunk of the car. Not the sound of shifting luggage, not the sound of something settling, not the natural sounds a vehicle makes when metal expands and contracts in temperature changes. This was deliberate, rhythmic, human, a thud, single impact, like a fist or foot hitting metal from inside. Mitchell froze, every sense suddenly focused on that sound. The courtyard around him disappeared. The conversation with Camilla faded. Everything narrowed to just that trunk and what might be inside it. He counted in his head, training from Afghanistan. When you heard something that might be important, you waited. You listened. You confirmed before reacting. 1, 2, 3 seconds of silence. Then another thud. Same intensity, same location, same deliberate quality. Someone was in that trunk. Someone was hitting it from inside. Someone wanted to be heard. Mitchell's heart rate increased, not from fear, from recognition, from understanding that the situation had just changed from suspicious to critical. He'd heard sounds like this before, hostage situations in Kabul, rooms where prisoners were being held, buildings where insurgents had hidden captured soldiers. Always the same pattern: deliberate knocking, controlled impacts, the sound of someone who couldn't call out but could make noise, the sound of someone who needed help and was doing everything possible to signal their presence. Mitchell took a step toward the rear of the vehicle. Camilla said something behind him. He didn't hear it, didn't process it. All his attention was on that trunk. He reached it, placed his hand flat against the metal, cold beneath his palm. Smooth, expensive car, luxury vehicle, the kind of car that should never have someone trapped inside. And then he felt it, a vibration, transmitted through the metal, someone moving inside, shifting position, and then another thud, stronger this time, right under his hand. Whoever was in there knew he was close, was trying harder, hitting the metal with more force, trying to make absolutely certain they were heard. Mitchell pressed his ear close to the trunk, listening, straining to hear anything beyond the impacts. That's when he heard the voice. "Help!" One word, muffled, almost inaudible, filtered through metal and whatever materials were packed around the person inside, but unmistakable. A child's voice, young, frightened, desperate, and not just any child. Mitchell had been around the palace long enough, had heard enough morning greetings, had stood guard during enough family arrivals and departures. He knew that voice, Princess Charlotte. The realization hit him like a physical blow. Not just someone in the trunk, not just a child, a member of the royal family he'd sworn to protect. An 8-year-old girl who should have been at Kensington Palace with her protection team. Who should have been safe. Who should never, under any circumstances, be locked inside a vehicle trunk. Mitchell's blood went cold. That ice water feeling he'd experienced in combat. When situations went from bad to critical in seconds. When training took over and emotion became secondary to action. His hand was still on the trunk. He could feel another impact. Weaker this time, like whoever was inside was getting tired, running out of strength to keep signaling. That decided it. No more waiting, no more procedure, no more diplomatic consideration for who was in the car or what authority they claimed. Someone, a child, was trapped in that trunk, had been calling for help, had been hitting the metal with whatever strength they had left, and Mitchell was going to get them out, right now, no matter what it cost him. He'd heard children's voices in Afghanistan, usually crying, sometimes screaming. Once, memorably, a little girl who'd been trapped under rubble after a building collapse. They dug for 6 hours to reach her. When they pulled her out, she'd looked up at Mitchell with these wide, terrified eyes. The same eyes he'd later learn belonged to Princess Charlotte. He'd seen her dozens of times around the palace. 7 years old, always polite, always smiling. Always with at least 2 security officers. That voice in the trunk. Muffled, terrified, desperate. It sounded exactly like her. Mitchell didn't think. He acted. His hand went to the trunk release. Locked. He tried the driver's side door. Locked as well. "Sergeant Mitchell, I am ordering you..." "Open the trunk." Mitchell's voice had changed now. No courtesy, no diplomatic language, just command. "Open it now." Camilla stood perfectly still. "There is nothing in that trunk that concerns you." "Open the trunk." Behind him, Mitchell heard footsteps, quick steps. He glanced over his shoulder. Corporal James Harrison, part of the same guard unit, had appeared from the north archway. Harrison had spotted the situation, was moving to assist. Good. Backup was always useful. "Ma'am," Harrison said, arriving next to Mitchell. "Is there a problem?" Mitchell didn't wait for Camilla to respond. "There's someone in the trunk," he said. "A child. I heard them call for help." Harrison's expression changed immediately. He'd served with Mitchell in Afghanistan, knew him well enough to trust his judgment without question. "Driver," Harrison said, turning to the man still standing by the car. "Open the trunk, now." The driver looked at Camilla, seeking permission, seeking guidance. "Don't you dare," Camilla said. That confirmed it. If there was nothing in the trunk, if this was just luggage, if this was truly a private matter, Camilla would have opened it immediately, would have shown them they were wrong, would have made them look foolish. Instead, she was blocking them, preventing inspection, which meant she knew what was inside, which meant she didn't want them to see it. Mitchell made his decision. He'd carried a small toolkit during his Afghanistan tours, multi-tool, lockpicks, emergency pry bar, standard equipment for a soldier who might need to access locked buildings or vehicles. He still carried a version of that kit, smaller now, but functional. He reached into his jacket pocket. "Sergeant, if you touch that vehicle," Camilla started. Mitchell pulled out the small pry bar, slid it into the gap between the trunk and the frame, applied pressure. The lock mechanism resisted for 3 seconds. Then it broke with a sharp crack. The trunk popped open. Mitchell lifted it fully. The hinges creaked slightly. Afternoon light flooded into the dark space, and stopped breathing. Inside the trunk, wedged between the leather suitcases like a discarded object, was Princess Charlotte, 8 years old, maybe 90 pounds. Wearing her school uniform, the same one Mitchell had seen her wearing that morning, during his first patrol check. White shirt, navy blue cardigan with the school crest, grey skirt. One of her knee socks had slipped down to her ankle. Her hands were behind her back. Duct tape wrapped around her wrists. Multiple layers, applied tight enough that Mitchell could see the adhesive pressing into her skin, creating red marks where she'd pulled against the restraints. Her ankles were bound the same way, tape wound several times around both legs. Whoever had done this had been thorough, had wanted to make absolutely certain she couldn't move, couldn't kick, couldn't escape. A strip of tape covered her mouth. Silver grey industrial tape, the kind used for packing boxes and sealing cargo, applied carefully across her lips and part of her cheeks. Her nose was visible above it, nostrils flaring as she struggled to breathe properly through limited air passages. Her hair, usually neat, usually carefully styled, was dishevelled. Strands stuck to her forehead with sweat. The trunk had no ventilation. Had been heating in the afternoon sun. She'd been breathing limited air in an enclosed space. But it was her eyes that hit Mitchell the hardest. Wide, terrified, showing white all around the irises. The kind of fear you only saw in combat situations, in people who thought they might die, in children who didn't understand what was happening, but knew it was bad. Those eyes locked onto Mitchell's face. Recognition flashed through the terror. She knew him. Had seen him around the palace, had probably waved to him during morning arrivals. She tried to make a sound, muffled by the tape. Not words, just a desperate pleading noise. The sound of someone who'd been calling for help and had finally been heard. Mitchell could see tear tracks on her face. Old tears and new ones. She'd been crying, probably since the moment they'd closed the trunk. Maybe before that. Maybe since the moment someone had grabbed her and started wrapping tape around her wrists. How long had she been in there? Mitchell's mind calculated. The car had entered the courtyard at 4:15. But Charlotte might have been placed inside before that. Might have been trapped in darkness and terror for longer. 30 minutes, 45, an hour. Mitchell had seen combat, had seen IED victims with their legs blown off, had seen buildings collapse on civilians, had seen soldiers die in his arms despite everything medical teams tried to do, had seen children caught in crossfire, had pulled bodies from rubble. He'd thought he'd seen the worst humanity could do to itself, but this was different. This wasn't war. This wasn't combat. This wasn't a situation where violence was expected and death was a possibility everyone had accepted. This was Windsor Castle, the heart of British heritage, a place that represented tradition and stability and the continuity of a nation. And a member of the royal family, someone who wore a crown, someone who had titles and position and authority, had just treated an 8-year-old child like an inconvenient object and to be stored away. Had bound her hands and covered her mouth and locked her in a trunk, in darkness, in terror. In a space so small she could barely move. For what? For spilling tea? For embarrassing someone at a social event? Mitchell had seen Taliban fighters show more humanity toward prisoners, had seen insurgents treat captured soldiers with more basic dignity than this. He felt something shift inside him, something cold and final and absolutely certain. Whatever protocol said, whatever consequences might come. Whatever happened to his career or his position or his future. None of that mattered. What mattered was that a child was in front of him, bound, terrified, looking at him with eyes that begged for help. And he was going to give it. He reached into the trunk. Careful not to hurt her. Careful not to scare her more than she already was. His hands found the tape on her wrists. "Charlotte," he said quietly, using her first name. No titles now, just speaking to a terrified child who needed to hear a familiar voice. "I'm going to get you out. You're safe now. I promise you're safe." She nodded, still crying, but her eyes showed understanding, relief. Mitchell worked the tape loose. The bindings had been tight, too tight. Her wrists were red where the adhesive had pressed into her skin. Whoever had done this hadn't been gentle. Behind him, Harrison had moved to block Camilla. The Queen Consort had started forward. Harrison's body language was clear. "Don't interfere. Don't come closer." Mitchell got Charlotte's hands free, then moved to her ankles. Same tape, same tight binding. The marks on her skin showed she'd been restrained for a while. Maybe 30 minutes, maybe longer. He lifted her out of the trunk. She weighed almost nothing, small for her age, fragile. The moment Mitchell set her down, she wrapped her arms around him, holding on, still crying, still terrified. Mitchell knelt down to her level, gently removed the tape from her mouth, slowly, carefully, trying not to hurt her more than necessary. The tape came off. Charlotte gasped, took a deep breath, then another. "You're okay," Mitchell said quietly. "You're safe. I've got you." She nodded against his shoulder. Couldn't speak yet. Just held onto him like he was the only solid thing in a world that had suddenly become terrifying. Mitchell looked up at Camilla. The Queen Consort stood 5 feet away. Her face was pale. Not from shock, from calculation, from realizing exactly how bad this looked. "Explain," Mitchell said. Not a request, a demand. Camilla straightened her spine, composed herself. When she spoke, her voice was controlled, almost casual. "The child was being disciplined. She'd embarrassed me in front of guests. This was a private family matter." Mitchell stared at her, processing those words. Family matter, discipline. As if binding an 8-year-old child and locking her in a trunk was a reasonable response to childhood misbehavior. "You put her in the trunk," Mitchell said slowly. "I placed her somewhere quiet where she could reflect on her actions," Camilla said. "Nothing more." Charlotte made a sound against Mitchell's shoulder. Not words, just a whimper of fear, of memory. Mitchell felt something shift inside him, something cold and final. He'd been trained to respect rank, to follow protocol, to maintain professional distance between himself and the royal family. All of that training disappeared. "Harrison," Mitchell said, his voice perfectly level. "Radio the guard commander. Tell him we have a Code 3 situation, then call the Metropolitan Police. We need Child Protection Services here immediately. Code 3. Emergency involving a royal family member. The highest priority alert in palace security." Harrison didn't hesitate. Pulled his radio, started calling. Camilla took a step forward. "You're making a terrible mistake, Sergeant." Mitchell stood, Charlotte still holding on to him. He looked at Camilla, really looked at her, saw through the title, through the crown, through the position, saw what she actually was. "The only mistake," Mitchell said quietly, "was thinking you could do this without consequences." He turned away from her, didn't wait for a response, carried Charlotte toward the guardhouse. Away from the car, away from Camilla, away from whatever had just happened. Behind him, he heard Camilla's voice, sharp, commanding. "Sergeant, Sergeant Mitchell, I am ordering you to—" Mitchell kept walking. Charlotte held onto him tighter. "You're safe now," he said again, because she needed to hear it, because he needed to say it. I promise, you're safe. The next 15 minutes passed in controlled chaos. Guard Commander Richard Wells arrived first. Former Special Forces, 20 years in the military, zero tolerance for protocol violations. He took one look at Charlotte, still holding Mitchell, still terrified, and his expression went cold. Briefing, Wells said. Now. Mitchell explained, quickly, efficiently. The unauthorized vehicle, the sounds from the trunk, Camilla's refusal to allow inspection, finding Charlotte bound and gagged. Wells listened without interruption. When Mitchell finished, Wells turned to look at Camilla, still standing by the car, isolated now. Several guards had formed a perimeter around her, not restraining her, just making sure she didn't leave. Ma'am, Wells said, his voice carrying across the courtyard, you're going to wait right there. Don't move. Don't speak. Don't touch anything. Camilla opened her mouth. Wells raised one hand. I said, don't speak. The Queen Consort closed her mouth. For the first time since Mitchell had known her, she looked uncertain, vulnerable. Good, Mitchell thought. Let her feel a fraction of what Charlotte felt. The Metropolitan Police arrived next. 2 officers from the Royal Protection Squad. They'd been on duty at a nearby location. 3 minutes response time. DI Sarah Chen took charge immediately. 38 years old, 15 years with the Met, specialist in royal security. She'd worked with Mitchell before, knew him as reliable, professional. She knelt down next to Charlotte. Gentle approach, non-threatening. The way you approached her traumatized children who'd been through something terrible. Hi, Charlotte, Chen said softly. My name is Sarah. I'm a police officer. I know you've been through something scary, but you're safe now. Nobody's going to hurt you. I just need to ask you some questions. Is that okay? Charlotte looked up at Mitchell, seeking permission, seeking reassurance, making sure it was actually safe to talk. Mitchell nodded. It's okay. You can tell her everything. D.I. Chen is here to help. Charlotte took a breath. When she spoke, her voice was quiet but clear. The voice of a child who'd been taught to speak properly, who'd had elocution lessons and diplomatic training, but with the tremor of someone who'd just been genuinely frightened. We were having tea, she said, in the green drawing room, with some American guests, important people. Mummy had told me that morning that we were hosting them. She said I should come, said it would be good practice for my manners. Chen nodded encouragingly. That sounds nice. What happened at the tea? Charlotte's hands twisted together, a nervous gesture. There were 6 guests, 3 men in suits, 3 women in dresses. Camilla was hosting. She kept talking about how well-behaved I was, how polite the royal children are. She kept using me as an example. Chen made notes, didn't interrupt. Let Charlotte tell it in her own way. I was sitting on the sofa, Charlotte continued, between Camilla and one of the American ladies. They'd given me a proper teacup, not a child's cup, a real one, to show I could handle it properly. Her voice got smaller. I was being careful. I promise I was being so careful. But the lady next to me laughed at something someone said. She moved suddenly. Her elbow bumped my arm. Charlotte's eyes filled with tears. The teacup tipped. Not a lot, just a little. But some tea spilled, maybe a tablespoon. It went on Camilla's dress, on her lap, just a little bit. Mitchell watched Charlotte's face as she remembered. Saw the moment when fear had replaced the normal atmosphere of a social event. I said sorry immediately, Charlotte said. I said it 3 times. I'm so sorry, Your Majesty. I'm so sorry. It was an accident. I'm so sorry. I was already reaching for napkins, already trying to help clean it up. She took another breath, steadying herself. But Camilla stood up really fast. Really suddenly, her face was different, angry, but also cold. She looked at the guests and smiled, but her eyes weren't smiling. She said, Children can be so clumsy, can't they? I do apologize for this disruption. Chen nodded. What happened next? She grabbed my arm, really hard, hard enough that it hurt, hard enough that I made a small sound. But she was still smiling at the guests, still acting like everything was fine. Charlotte rubbed her arm, where apparently a bruise had formed. Mitchell could see it now, finger-shaped marks on her upper arm. She pulled me up from the sofa, Charlotte continued, said to the guests, "Please excuse us for a moment. The princess needs to learn that actions have consequences." She said it in a nice voice, like she was being a good step-grandmother, but her hand on my arm was so tight. Mitchell's jaw clenched. He didn't interrupt. Let Charlotte finish. She took me out of the room, into the corridor. As soon as the door closed behind us, her face changed completely. No more smile, just anger. She said I'd embarrassed her in front of important people, said I'd made her look bad, said I'd ruined an important meeting. Charlotte's voice got quieter. I said it was an accident, said I was sorry, but she said sorry wasn't enough, said I needed to learn respect, said children these days don't understand consequences. Chen made more notes. Then what happened? She called for 2 staff members, Mr. Davidson and Mrs. Lee. They came from the staff quarters. They looked scared, like they didn't want to be there, like they knew something bad was happening. Charlotte wiped her eyes. Camilla told them to take me to the car in the service courtyard, said I needed to be taught a lesson, said I needed some time to think about what I'd done. Did the staff members say anything? Chen asked. Mrs. Lee said, "Your Majesty, perhaps this isn't necessary." She said it very quietly, very respectfully, but Camilla turned to her and said if she didn't follow instructions immediately, she'd be dismissed before the day ended. Said she'd make sure Mrs. Lam never worked in any royal household again. Charlotte took another breath. So they took me to the car. Mr. Davidson was holding my hand. He kept saying, "I'm sorry, Princess. I'm so sorry." But he didn't stop. Didn't refuse. He was too scared. And then? Camilla followed us to the car. She had a roll of tape, the grey tape they use for packing boxes. She told Mr. Davidson to tape my wrists. He didn't want to. I could see it in his face. But he did it. He taped my hands behind my back. Charlotte demonstrated, putting her hands behind her. Then she told him to tape my ankles, so I couldn't run, so I couldn't kick, so I couldn't escape. Mitchell felt his hands clench into fists, forced himself to relax them, to stay professional. Then she put the tape on my mouth, Charlotte said. She did that part herself. She said, "This is so you can think quietly about what you did. No talking, no crying, just thinking." She pressed it really hard. It hurt when she pulled my hair, pulling it on. And then? Charlotte's voice became very small. Then they put me in the trunk. Camilla told them to put me in the center, between the suitcases, so I wouldn't move around when the car was driving. Mr. Davidson put a blanket under me first. I think he was trying to make it less hard, but it was still the trunk. It was still dark. Tears were flowing freely now. Camilla looked down at me before they closed it. She said, "When you're ready to apologize properly, when you're ready to show real respect, then we'll let you out. Until then, you can think about your behavior." Charlotte sobbed once. Then she closed the trunk. Everything went dark. I couldn't see anything. I could barely breathe. The air was bad, hot. It smelled like car things, like metal and rubber. "How long were you in there?" Chen asked gently. "I don't know. It felt like forever. I tried to count, but I kept losing track. I tried to stay calm like Mummy taught me, but I was so scared. I thought maybe they'd forget about me. Maybe they'd drive somewhere and I'd never get out." "Is that when you started knocking?" Charlotte nodded. "I waited at first. Thought they'd come back quickly. Thought Camilla would change her mind. But nobody came. So I started kicking the trunk, trying to make noise, hoping someone would hear. You did exactly the right thing, Chen said firmly. Being brave, making noise. That's how Sergeant Mitchell found you. Charlotte looked at Mitchell. I heard your voice. When you were talking to Camilla, I didn't hear all the words, but I heard you asking questions. I knew you were a guard. I knew guards help people. So I kicked harder. I tried to yell through the tape. I wanted you to hear me. Mitchell's throat tightened. This child, 8 years old, bound and terrified in a dark trunk, had still had the presence of mind to make noise when she'd heard someone nearby who might help. That was courage, real courage, not the absence of fear, but the ability to act despite it. Mitchell checked his watch. 4:47. The car had arrived at 4:15. Charlotte had been in that trunk for at least 30 minutes, possibly longer if she'd been placed inside before the car entered the courtyard. 30 minutes, in darkness, bound, unable to breathe properly, terrified, for spilling tea. Mitchell looked across the courtyard at Camilla. She was watching them, not with concern, with calculation, already planning her defense, already preparing her explanation. Chen stood up. Thank you, Charlotte. You've been very brave. She turned to Mitchell. I need to take photographs, document the marks on her wrists and ankles. Then we'll need a formal statement. Mitchell nodded. Whatever you need. Chen took her phone out, started documenting. The red marks on Charlotte's wrists, the corresponding marks on her ankles, the fear still visible in her eyes. Evidence. Cold. Clinical. Necessary. While Chen worked, Mitchell's mind was processing, trying to understand, trying to make sense of something that made no sense. He'd been in Afghanistan, had seen Taliban fighters do terrible things, had seen children used as weapons, as shields, as tools. But this was England, Windsor Castle, the heart of the royal family, and a queen consort had just treated a child like an inconvenient object to be stored away. How was that possible? How did someone look at a frightened 8-year-old and decide that binding her hands and locking her in a trunk was an appropriate response? Mitchell didn't have an answer, wasn't sure he wanted one. Chen finished photographing, put her phone away. I need to speak with Queen Camilla now. Good luck with that, Wells said. He'd been standing nearby, monitoring the situation. She's already lawyered up, called her personal solicitor 3 minutes ago. Of course she had. Because innocent people always called lawyers immediately. Chen walked across the courtyard. Mitchell watched. Saw her stop in front of Camilla. Saw the conversation begin. Couldn't hear the words, but the body language told the story. Camilla. Defensive, indignant, explaining. Chen. Unmoved, professional, documenting. The driver had been separated, interviewed by another officer. From what Mitchell could see, the man was talking freely, probably explaining that he'd just followed orders, that he'd been uncomfortable with the situation, that he'd been afraid of losing his job. Standard response from people in bad situations. Following orders, just doing their job. Didn't question it because questioning meant consequences. Mitchell had heard those explanations before, in military tribunals, in post-operation debriefings. Usually from people trying to justify actions they knew were wrong. Charlotte tugged on Mitchell's sleeve. He looked down at her. Thank you for finding me, she said quietly. Mitchell's throat tightened. You're welcome. I kept knocking. I wasn't sure anyone would hear. I heard you. Mitchell knelt down again, eye level. And even if I hadn't heard you, I would have checked. That's my job, to keep you safe. Charlotte nodded. Then, quieter. Camilla said no one would believe me. She said I was just a child and she was the queen. She said if I told anyone, I'd be in trouble. The words hung in the air. Cold, calculated, exactly the kind of thing an abuser would say to their victim. Don't tell. No one will believe you. You'll be the one punished. Mitchell had heard similar words in different contexts. From Taliban leaders controlling their communities, from criminals intimidating witnesses, from anyone who held power and wanted to keep their actions hidden. She was wrong, Mitchell said firmly. I believe you. D.I. Chen believes you. Everyone here believes you. And you're not in trouble. You did nothing wrong. Charlotte's eyes filled with tears again. Not from fear this time. From relief. From hearing words she'd needed to hear. A car approached. Black Range Rover. Palace plates. Moving fast. Wells straightened. That'll be the parents. Mitchell stood. Watched the vehicle enter the courtyard. It stopped 20 feet away. The rear door opened before the driver could come around. Prince William stepped out. No jacket. Shirt sleeves rolled up. Face tight with controlled fury. He saw Charlotte first, his daughter. Still standing close to Mitchell, still frightened, still showing the effects of what had happened. William covered the distance in seconds, knelt down, pulled Charlotte into his arms, held her without words, just held her. Mitchell stepped back, giving them space, giving them privacy. Catherine emerged from the car next, Kate, looking pale, looking terrified. She moved to her husband and daughter, family closing ranks, protecting their own. William stood, Charlotte in his arms. He looked at Mitchell. Report. Not a request, a command from a future king. Mitchell gave it, same as before. Clear, efficient, facts only, no interpretation, no emotion. William listened. His expression didn't change, but his arms tightened around Charlotte. When Mitchell finished, William turned to look at Camilla. She was still across the courtyard, still surrounded by guards and police, still trying to maintain some appearance of dignity. Catherine, William said quietly, take Charlotte to the car. Kate nodded, took Charlotte from William's arms, whispered something Mitchell couldn't hear, carried her daughter back to the Range Rover. William watched them go, made sure they were safe. Then he turned back to Mitchell. Did she resist when you tried to inspect the vehicle? Yes, sir. Claimed it was a private family matter, ordered me to stand down, threatened my position. And you inspected anyway? Yes, sir. I heard sounds from the trunk, heard a child's voice calling for help. At that point, protocol was irrelevant. William nodded slowly. Good. He turned to Wells. I want a full investigation. I want every person who was involved identified and interviewed. I want documentation of every order given, every action taken. Already underway, sir, Wells said. And I want Sergeant Mitchell's actions officially commended. He's getting a written recognition for this. From me personally. Mitchell blinked. That's not necessary, sir. It absolutely is necessary. William's voice was firm. You did what you were supposed to do, what you were sworn to do. You protected a member of this family when others failed to. That deserves recognition. He paused. Then, quieter. Thank you. 2 words. Simple, but carrying weight behind them. Mitchell nodded. Just doing my job, sir. William's expression softened slightly, almost a smile. If every guard did their job the way you just did, this family would be significantly safer. He turned to look at Camilla again. The Queen Consort was watching them, waiting, probably hoping William would defend her, would understand, would accept her explanation. William started walking toward her. Mitchell watched, saw the moment when Camilla realized this wasn't going to go the way she'd expected. The conversation was brief. Mitchell couldn't hear all of it, but he heard enough. William's voice. You will not be near my children again. Not unsupervised. Not alone. Not until I'm satisfied you understand what you did wrong. Camilla's response. Something defensive. Something about discipline. About embarrassment. William cutting her off. You bound my daughter's hands. You covered her mouth. You locked her in a trunk. And you were planning to drive away. What was your plan? Where were you taking her? How long were you planning to keep her there? Silence from Camilla. William again. You're done here today. Go back to your residence. Don't speak to the press. Don't issue statements. Don't try to control this narrative. Because if you do, I will make sure every single detail of what happened here becomes public record. Mitchell saw Camilla's shoulders slump, saw the moment when she realized she'd lost this confrontation. William turned away from her, walked back to Wells. Make sure she gets home safely, but she doesn't go anywhere else. Not until Charles is informed. Not until we've decided how to handle this. Understood, sir, Wells said. William looked at Mitchell one more time, nodded, then walked back to his car, to Kate, to Charlotte. The Range Rover drove away, taking Princess Charlotte somewhere safe. Somewhere Camilla couldn't reach her. Mitchell watched them go, felt something settle in his chest. Not pride exactly, just satisfaction. The satisfaction of knowing he'd done the right thing, even when it was difficult, even when it meant defying someone who outranked him by every possible measure. Behind him, Chen had finished her interview, was walking back toward Mitchell. Well, she said, stopping next to him, that's going to be interesting paperwork. Mitchell almost smiled. Interesting is one word for it. For what it's worth, Chen said, you did the right thing. Most guards would have backed down when a royal told them to stop. You didn't. Most guards haven't been in combat, Mitchell replied. Haven't learned that orders from authority don't mean anything if following them gets people hurt. Chen nodded. True enough. She paused. Then, I need you to come down to the station tomorrow. Give a formal statement. I know you gave me the basics, but we'll need everything documented properly. This is going to be a significant case. I'll be there. Bring your union rep, just in case. Mitchell raised an eyebrow. You think I'll need one? I think Camilla has expensive lawyers who are going to try very hard to make this your fault somehow. Better to have representation just in case they succeed. Fair point. I'll bring someone. Chen nodded. Walked away to finish her documentation. Mitchell stood alone in the courtyard. The black estate car was still there. Trunk still open. Evidence markers already placed around it. Photographs being taken. Documentation happening. In 24 hours, this would be all over the news. Royal scandal. Child endangerment. Questions about Camilla's fitness for her position. But right now, in this moment, Mitchell didn't care about any of that. He cared that Charlotte was safe, that she was with her parents, that the trauma might heal. He cared that he'd trusted his instincts, had done his job properly, had refused to back down when someone tried to intimidate him into compliance. And he cared that maybe, just maybe, this would send a message. To every guard in the palace, to every protection officer, to everyone who served the royal family. Your duty is to protect, not to obey blindly, not to look away when something's wrong, not to let authority become an excuse for harm. Protect, even when it's difficult, even when it costs you something, even when the threat comes from someone who wears a crown. Mitchell took a breath, straightened his uniform, walked back to his post. His shift wasn't over, he still had work to do. 3 hours later, Mitchell was in the guard station. Shift change had happened. He'd been relieved from active duty, but asked to remain on site for additional questioning. He sat in a small office. Plain walls, basic furniture, a cup of tea that had gone cold 20 minutes ago. The door opened. Princess Anne walked in. Mitchell stood immediately. Anne was something different. Not like Camilla, not like most of the family. Anne had served in the military, understood what duty meant, commanded genuine respect. Sit down, Sergeant, Anne said. Not harsh, just direct. Mitchell sat. Anne took the chair across from him. I've read the reports, Anne said. I've spoken with Charlotte. And I've spoken with William. Mitchell waited, didn't know what to say. Anne studied him for a moment. Then, my mother would have been proud of you. Mitchell blinked. Mom? Queen Elizabeth? Anne's voice was soft. She valued loyalty, real loyalty, not the kind that comes from titles or position, the kind that comes from doing what's right, even when it's difficult. She paused. You demonstrated that kind of loyalty today. You protected a child when someone who should have protected her didn't. That's not something we take lightly. I was just doing my job, ma'am. Yes, Anne said. You were. But not everyone would have. Most people would have looked the other way, would have decided it wasn't their business, would have followed orders even when those orders were wrong. She leaned forward slightly. My mother dealt with people like that her entire reign. People who valued position over principle, who cared more about preserving their own status than doing what was right. Mitchell didn't respond. Wasn't sure what Anne wanted him to say. You're going to face consequences for this, Anne continued. Camilla has already complained to Charles. She's claiming you assaulted her, that you ignored her direct orders, that you had no authority to inspect her vehicle. Mitchell's stomach tightened. I see. Don't worry, Anne said quickly. Charles knows better. He's seen the evidence. He's spoken to Charlotte. He knows what actually happened. She paused. But it's still going to be uncomfortable for you. The press will get hold of this. Your name will come out. People will have opinions. I understand, ma'am. Anne nodded. Good. Because I want you to know that William and I are behind you. Completely. If anyone tries to punish you for this, they'll have to go through us first. Something loosened in Mitchell's chest. Relief he hadn't realized he'd been holding. Thank you, ma'am. Anne stood. One more thing. William wants you assigned to the Children's Protection Detail. Permanently. He trusts you. After today, I think that trust is well placed. Mitchell stood as well. I'd be honored. Good. Anne moved toward the door, stopped, looked back at him. My mother had a saying. She used to tell it to her guards, especially the young ones who took their duty seriously. What was it, Mum? The crown doesn't make you royal. How you treat people does. Anne smiled slightly. You remember that, Sergeant. Because you showed more royalty today than someone who actually wears a crown. She left. The door closed quietly behind her. Mitchell stood alone in the office, processing, absorbing. Then he sat down, picked up his cold tea, drank it anyway. 24 hours later, the story broke. National news, international coverage, royal scandal of significant proportion. The details were carefully managed. Palace press office worked overtime, but the basic facts came out. Queen Camilla had bound Princess Charlotte with duct tape and locked her in a car trunk. A royal guard had discovered her and freed her. The child was safe. An investigation was ongoing. The public reaction was immediate and harsh. Calls for Camilla to be stripped of her title. Demands for criminal prosecution. Protests outside Buckingham Palace. Mitchell stayed out of it, declined all media interviews, refused to comment, just went to work every day, did his job. But things had changed. Guards who'd previously kept their distance now nodded to him in corridors. Senior officers made a point of checking in with him. Even other members of the royal family, people he'd never spoken to before, would stop to say thank you. The message was clear. He'd done something that mattered, something that reminded everyone what the guards were actually for. Not ceremony, not tradition, not standing still in fancy uniforms for tourists to photograph. Protection, real protection, the kind that meant putting yourself between harm and the people you'd sworn to keep safe. 6 weeks after the incident, Mitchell was called to Kensington Palace. Private meeting, no explanation given. He arrived at the designated time, was escorted to a small sitting room, told to wait. 5 minutes later, Princess Charlotte walked in. With her parents, but she walked in first. She looked better, healthier. The fear had faded from her eyes. She was smiling. "Hi, Sergeant Mitchell," she said. "Hello, Princess Charlotte." She held out a piece of paper. "I made this for you." Mitchell took it carefully. A drawing, crayon on construction paper, a figure in a red uniform, a guard. Next to him, a smaller figure with a crown. In the top corner, written in a child's handwriting, "Thank you for saving me." Mitchell felt his throat tighten. "This is beautiful. Thank you." Charlotte smiled. "Mummy said I should give it to you. Said you'd understand what it means." Kate stepped forward. "We wanted to see you in person. To thank you properly. What you did." She paused. "You saved our daughter. There's no adequate way to express what that means to us." William nodded. "Charlotte talks about you. She says you're her favorite guard. She says you listen when you're scared." Mitchell looked down at Charlotte. "Always, any time. If you ever need help, you find me. Or any guard who looks like me. Anyone in uniform. We're here to keep you safe." Charlotte nodded seriously. "I know. I'm not scared anymore." "Good." Mitchell knelt down to her level. "And if anyone ever makes you feel unsafe again, you tell someone immediately. You did exactly the right thing by making noise in the trunk, by making sure I could hear you. That was very brave." "Papa said you were brave too," Charlotte said. "He said you didn't listen when Camilla told you to stop. He said sometimes not listening is the right thing to do." Mitchell glanced at William. The prince shrugged slightly. "She asked. I gave her an honest answer." Mitchell looked back at Charlotte. "Your papa is right. Sometimes rules matter. Sometimes what's right matters more." Charlotte threw her arms around Mitchell's neck, hugged him, quick and fierce. "Thank you for finding me," she whispered. Mitchell hugged her back. Gentle, careful. "You're welcome, Princess. You're very welcome." When she stepped back, Kate had tears in her eyes. William's jaw was tight. "We won't forget this," William said quietly. "What you did, the risk you took, we won't forget." Mitchell stood. "I was just doing my job, sir." "No," William said firmly. "You were doing what was right. Those aren't always the same thing." They talked for a few more minutes. Small talk, easier conversation. Then Mitchell was escorted out. He walked back through Kensington Palace. Through corridors he'd walked dozens of times before, past paintings and artifacts and history. Everything looked the same, but felt different, because he understood now, in a way he hadn't before, what this job actually meant. What it had always meant, but people sometimes forgot. These weren't just ceremonial positions. These weren't just traditions for tourists. This was real. The protection was real. The duty was real. And sometimes that duty meant standing up to the very people you were supposed to serve. Meant saying no when everyone expected you to say yes. Meant trusting your instincts over authority's orders. Mitchell had done that. Had made that choice. Had risked his career, his position, his entire future. And he'd do it again. Tomorrow, next week, whenever necessary. Because at the end of the day, when you stripped away all the ceremony and tradition and royal protocol, the job was simple. Keep children safe. Protect the innocent. Do what's right. Even when it's hard, especially when it's hard. Mitchell reached the palace gate, showed his credentials, was cleared for departure. He stepped out into London sunlight. Clear sky. Autumn chill in the air. Behind him, Princess Charlotte was safe. In front of him, another shift tomorrow. Another day of duty. He walked toward the underground station, pulled out his phone, looked at the photo he'd taken of Charlotte's drawing before returning it to her parents. A guard and a princess. Simple crayon figures, but meaning everything. Mitchell smiled, put his phone away, kept walking. Tomorrow, same time, same duty, and he'd be ready, always ready. Because royal guards aren't just ceremonial, they're the last line of defense for history, for tradition, for the people who represent a nation. When everyone else looks away, they keep watching. When everyone else stays silent, they speak up. And when a child is locked in a trunk, bound and terrified, they do what Sergeant David Mitchell did. They force it open. They refuse to back down. They protect, no matter what it costs. If this story showed you something about Royal Guards you didn't know before, make sure you're subscribed to Crown Watch. We share these stories every day, the real stories that happen behind palace walls. Tomorrow we'll tell you what happened when Prince Harry confronted the guard who'd saved his niece. You won't believe what he said. Drop a comment right now. Tell us, should Queen Camilla face criminal charges for what she did to Princess Charlotte? Should she lose her title? We'll see you tomorrow, same time. Another story the palace never expected anyone to tell.